I decided to go camping alone for the first time in a long while. I was tired of busy roads, screens, noise, and people always around me. I wanted the feeling of being alone with nothing but the trees, the sound of insects, and the smell of pine needles in the air. I picked a remote area deep inside a large forest reserve, far away from normal campsites, places with tourists, and spots where hikers frequently walked. I wanted something that felt untouched, a place that reminded me that the world was bigger than the things I saw every day. I parked my car at a gravel pull-off spot and carried my backpack into the woods. The trail was narrow and old, barely visible in some places, covered in fallen leaves and dry sticks from seasons that came and went without human footsteps. The air felt clean, slightly cold, and carried the scent of wet dirt and old plant growth. I passed through tall trees with rough bark and a thick spreading canopy, blocking part of the light and giving the ground a soft green shade. My boots made soft crunching sounds with every step. It took me almost 3 hours of slow walking before I finally settled on a spot that looked perfect. It was near a small stream, just a few feet wide, with clear water moving slowly around smooth stones. The area was surrounded by thick forest, but open enough that I could put up a tent without branches pressing against it. The ground was soft but not muddy. I dropped my pack and stood still for a minute, breathing in the quiet. There was no traffic, no talking, no engine sounds. Only wind touching tree branches and the faint sound of running water. I set up my small green tent, tightened the corners, placed my sleeping bag and ground mat inside, and checked my food supplies. Everything was fine. I felt relaxed, the type of peaceful feeling that comes from knowing nobody else is anywhere around. I walked to the stream, dipped my hands in the cold water, and looked at the trees on the opposite side. The forest looked endless. By the time the sun began dropping, I gathered dry wood and stacked it neatly. I cooked a small meal using my camp stove, then sat on a flat rock while the sky changed color. Orange, then dark gold, then a deep blue-gray. Slowly the temperature dropped, and the air became colder around me. I put out the stove, packed everything away, and got ready to sleep. I could hear insects in the distance and the stream flowing steadily. I crawled into the tent, zipped it shut, and lay down on my sleeping bag. The ground felt uneven under my body, but not uncomfortable. I closed my eyes and listened to nature. Time passed slowly, and I drifted off. I woke up again in the darkness. I didn't know why at first. My thinking was foggy and heavy from sleep. Then I realized I heard something outside. It was a sound that didn't belong to wind or streams or small animals. It was a crunch of dead leaves under weight. A slow, steady sound like someone or something walking near my camp. I stayed perfectly still, feeling my heartbeat start to speed up. I listened more closely. The steps were not fast. They were calm, heavy enough that they could not be from a small creature. I began to think about what animals could be out there. Bears, maybe deer, maybe even a wild boar. I tried to tell myself not to panic, but it was hard when I could hear movement so close to where I lay. I slowly sat up inside the tent, making no noise. I heard another sound, something brushing against a tree trunk. Then another step. Whatever was moving was close, very close. I looked at the thin tent wall and felt exposed. There was nothing between me and whatever was outside except thin fabric. I waited without making a sound, not even breathing too loud. The walking sound came again, this time directly behind my tent. I felt a strange tension in my chest and neck, like every muscle had tightened at once. I held still and listened. The footsteps seemed to pause. I imagined something standing there, sniffing the air or looking at the tent. I did not have a clear plan or idea of what to do. I just listened. Slow minutes passed. Then the sound of heavy breathing came briefly. Then slowly the steps moved away, one at a time, fading into the distance and disappearing into the deeper part of the woods. I finally let out a slow breath and rested my back against the sleeping bag. I stayed awake a long time, waiting for more sounds. Eventually I lay down again, though I barely slept. When daylight finally touched the outside of the tent, I unzipped it and stepped out carefully. The forest looked calm and quiet, as if nothing had happened. I checked around the tent and saw some areas where the leaves were disturbed, but I couldn't tell what caused them. Could have been anything. I made breakfast, though I was not very hungry. My mind was busy replaying the sounds from the night. I told myself it was probably just a large deer moving through the area. The forest belonged to animals, not me. I finished eating and decided to go for a walk to get rid of the uneasy feeling still sitting in my stomach. I followed the stream for about half a mile, listening to the sound of flowing water and trying to calm down. I found fresh tracks in the soft dirt near the bank. They were not deer tracks. They were darker, wider, and deeper than anything I expected. I crouched down and stared at them, noticing the clear shape of a boot tread in the mud. Not an animal, person. Someone else had been near my camp. The realization made my skin go cold. I stood up slowly and looked around the forest, seeing nothing but trees, leaves, and shadows. But knowing someone had walked that close to me in the night changed the entire feeling of the woods. The quiet no longer felt peaceful, felt watchful. I turned around and walked back toward camp immediately, but slower than normal, listening for anything unusual. Every sound made me alert. Every rustle in the bushes made my chest tense. When I reached my campsite again, I checked through my gear. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved. But that did not make me feel better. I could imagine someone standing near my tent at night, watching through the thin fabric while I slept. I considered packing up and leaving immediately, but a part of me told myself I might be overreacting. Maybe the prints were old. Maybe someone had passed by long before I arrived. Maybe the footsteps I heard could still be from an animal. I tried to settle my thoughts, though none of my logic fully convinced me. I spent the rest of the day trying to act normal, but I kept catching myself turning around to look behind me, expecting to see someone standing among the trees. The sun moved slowly across the sky, and by evening my nerves were still on edge. I boiled water, ate dinner, and cleaned everything up. The shadows in the woods grew longer. The light changed again, soft orange to darker gray. The air became cold once more. I crawled into my tent, but I did not feel relaxed like the night before. I lay with my backpack close to me, aware of every small noise outside. Hours passed before sleep finally came. I always liked the idea of spending time alone in the wilderness. I used to watch videos of people camping far from roads, far from noise, far from everyone. I liked the idea of peace, of being away from the same everyday things I saw all the time. I wanted quiet. I wanted to sit with nature and not hear cars, not hear people arguing in houses, not hear the stress that stayed in the air in cities. I wanted to feel like I was out there by myself, and maybe when I came back I would feel different and stronger. I planned to go alone for 3 days. I chose a forest about 20 miles outside the city. I looked at satellite maps for a spot far from common trails where I could make camp without anyone walking near me. I wanted complete isolation. I packed only what I needed. I tried to keep everything simple and realistic. I brought a tent big enough for one person, a good sleeping bag, a knife, food, a first aid kit, and a flashlight. I also had a small battery pack for my phone. The phone was mostly for emergencies, but I planned not to use it unless I needed to. I wanted to disconnect. When I arrived at the edge of the forest, I parked my car on a dirt pull-off spot near the trees. Nobody else was around. There was a long gravel road behind me and thick woods in front of me. I stood there for a moment with my backpack on, looking at the trees and letting the feeling sink in. I was about to walk in alone. No noise, no people, just the wind and the forest. Felt good, like something I needed. I started hiking in. The weather was good. Not too hot, not cold. The air smelled clean, sharp, and deep with pine and dirt. As I walked further in, the sounds changed. At first I heard distant cars and wind hitting open ground. After 20 minutes, I could no longer hear anything from the outside world. I heard only trees moving in the wind, birds, and the crunch of the ground under my boots. I felt separated, and that feeling was what I wanted. The deeper I went, the thicker the trees grew. I followed a dry creek bed for a mile to stay oriented. I walked another hour until I reached the spot I chose on the map. It was a clearing surrounded halfway by tall pines and on the other side by a gentle slope that led down to a dried-out stream. The ground was mostly level, soft with pine needles and dirt, perfect for a tent. I dropped my backpack and looked around. I felt far from everything, and that made me feel free. I took off the pack, set it down, stretched my back, and began setting up my tent. I hammered the stakes into the ground with a heavy piece of wood I found nearby, and when I finished, I lay down inside the tent for a minute and listened. The silence was thick. I could hear only faint wind in the treetops. No human-made sound at all. It was exactly what I wanted. I stepped back outside and took a slow walk around the camp area. I wanted to get a mental map of the surroundings. I memorized tree shapes, ground slopes, and distances. I believed that when you camp alone, you should know the area well in case something happens at night. It helps control fear and panic. I walked down toward the dry stream bed. The ground felt different there, darker and softer. It looked like water had once carved through the ground, but now it was dry, full of dead branches and leaves. I kept going for a few feet but stopped when I heard something move among the leaves. It could have been a small animal, maybe a rabbit, but I had a rule to not wander too far during the first few hours. I turned around and walked back to camp. I gathered dry sticks and branches for a fire. The ground was scattered with old wood, mostly dry, which was good for burning. I set up a small fire ring using flat rocks from near the tent and piled the wood next to it. Then I checked my backpack again to make sure I had everything in reach in case I needed to grab something fast at night. I placed my knife inside the tent close to where I would sleep. I always camp like that, even when nothing strange is expected. I believe that when you are alone outdoors, you have to assume that if something bad happens, nobody will help you. It is a simple rule, but a serious one. The sun slowly dipped behind the trees and a darker tone spread across the forest. Temperature dropped a little. I sat near the fire ring and started the fire using dry bark as tinder. Caught easily. The flames felt good and warm against the cool evening air. I took out food from my pack and ate while sitting on a fallen log. The forest looked peaceful. The fire made the shadows dance around the trees. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt strange. It was calm. As the sky grew darker, I noticed a slight unease settle in, not fear, but the kind of alert feeling you get when darkness takes away the comfort of everything being visible. It was natural. Darkness brings caution. I sat closer to the fire and listened more carefully. I heard normal forest sounds at first, branches moving, insects, maybe distant night birds. But after a while, the sounds seemed to change. It might have been in my head, but it felt like the forest got quieter than usual. The wind felt lighter, the background noises softened, and the thick darkness between the trees felt heavier. I told myself this was normal. Night in the wilderness always feels bigger, more mysterious, more serious. The human brain reacts to darkness because our eyes are weak without light. I reminded myself that nothing unnatural was happening. The world was just moving into nighttime. But even with that rational thought, the human body reacts differently. I felt more alert and more aware of every noise. After some time, I put out the fire and got ready to sleep. The moonlight barely touched the ground under the tree canopy, so the campsite became almost completely dark. I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut. I slid into the sleeping bag and lay on my back listening. The forest was very still. Sometimes I could hear the distant movement of branches as if something brushed against them. I believed it was the wind shifting directions. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. I do not know how long I slept before the first sound woke me. It was a sound of dry leaves and branches crunching under weight, not like a small animal. It sounded heavier, like something walking. I opened my eyes inside the darkness of the tent. My heart immediately beat faster. I listened. The sound continued for a moment, slow, steady, measured. I tried to identify what it could be. I did not jump to panic. In forests, deer and even larger animals can walk near campsites at night. I stayed silent, breathing slowly, trying not to make sound. Then the footsteps stopped. The stillness of the forest returned, and I stared at the tent ceiling in the dark, waiting. After a minute with no sound, I started to calm down. But before I could drift back towards sleep, The footsteps started again, closer this time. I could feel them through the ground. I tensed up. Every sound seemed sharper. My brain wanted to categorize the movement. It did not sound like a deer. It also did not sound like a bear, because it was too slow and careful. Bears usually make snapping noises or heavy shifts. This sounded like controlled steps. I told myself maybe it was a large animal being cautious. Maybe it smelled food. I stayed completely still. The steps moved parallel to the tent, never stopping at one point. It made me believe something was circling. I felt sweat on my back even though the air was cold. I stayed silent. Eventually, the steps faded and the forest became quiet again. I forced myself to wait before moving. I counted numbers in my head to control fear. After 2 full minutes of silence, I slowly reached for the knife lying beside my sleeping bag. My hand closed around the handle. I did not open the tent. I just held the knife and listened. But nothing happened again. I stayed awake for a long time, maybe 2 hours, before sleep slowly returned. When morning light broke through the trees, I sat up inside the tent and listened. The forest felt alive again with normal sounds. Birds, movement, wind. I felt relieved. The fear from the night seemed almost unreal in daylight. I crawled out of the tent and stood up, stretching. The air was cold but fresh. I looked around the ground near my camp with cautious interest. I wanted to see footprints or some sign of what walked nearby. I scanned the dirt near the tent. I saw disturbed pine needles and boot-shaped impressions. At first I thought maybe I made them earlier. I checked the pattern. They were not mine. They were larger, and the direction of them was not consistent with where I had walked yesterday. These prints circled the tent. My stomach tightened. That meant the sound I heard at night was not an animal. It had been a person. My first reaction was confusion. I was deep in the forest, far from trails. Why would anyone be here at night, silently walking around a random campsite? I tried to think of any practical explanation. Maybe another camper had gotten lost and passed through. But the prints did not lead toward my camp and then away. They circled. Someone had stood near my tent, walked slowly around it, and then left back into the woods without making noise once they were gone. I crouched over the prints and studied them with slow breathing. Some were fresh and clear. The size looked like normal adult boots. That realization created a cold tension in my chest. I stood up and looked around at the trees. The feeling of isolation no longer felt peaceful. The quiet morning air now felt heavy with awareness. I was no longer alone mentally, even if I saw nobody. I made breakfast near the fire pit, but I did not enjoy eating. My mind kept returning to the prints. I felt watched even though I saw nothing. Every rustle in the trees made me look up. Every shift of branches put my nerves on edge. I considered packing up and leaving immediately, but a part of me wanted to stay. I told myself it might have been someone passing by once. Maybe they walked at night because they did not want to interact. Maybe they were scared of me. I tried to convince myself not to panic. Still, I decided to make changes. I moved some dry branches and sticks around the camp perimeter so that if someone approached again at night, they would step on them and make more noise. It was a simple early warning. I also gathered a large stick to keep next to the knife inside the tent. I even tied some paracord between a few trees around the tent about knee height so anything walking through would disturb it. I felt more secure preparing defenses. After setting these precautions, I walked a short distance from camp to explore a little. I followed the direction the boot prints left. They went up the slope and deeper into the woods. After about 20 yards, the ground changed from soft pine needles to harder soil with dry rocks, and the prints faded. I moved further downhill before stopping. The forest looked normal, but I felt uneasy as if the space held something hidden. I returned to camp and decided to distract myself by collecting water. I followed the dry creek bed toward a known water source half a mile away. I walked slowly, and every sound in the forest now felt louder. I forced myself to breathe steadily. After a while, I reached a shallow pool fed by underground moisture. The water was not perfectly clean but could be filtered. I filled my bottle and headed back. The air felt heavy, as if I was being watched, but I saw nothing. When I arrived at camp again, I rebuilt the fire and sat on the fallen log. I ate some food quietly while studying the treeline. The sunlight passed through branches and created long shadows. Time moved slowly. I tried to calm myself by remembering that fear often makes normal things feel threatening. Still, the prints could not be ignored. Someone had been there. Someone walking silently in the dark at night around my tent was not normal. The afternoon passed with small tasks: arranging gear, checking surroundings, walking a few yards out and back just to keep moving. Eventually, the sun began dropping again. I felt tension building deep inside. I knew night was coming again, and I did not know if the person would return. As the sky darkened, I lit the fire again. The flames gave some comfort, but the idea of sleeping again worried me. When full darkness fell, the woods turned silent again. The wind was light and the branches barely moved. I sat close to the fire until it burned low. When I finally put it out, the darkness took over the forest. I climbed into the tent with the knife and stick beside me. I lay in the sleeping bag staring into the dark. I waited. My heartbeat was slower than last night because I felt more prepared, but also more certain that something was not right out here. After what felt like an hour, I finally started drifting towards sleep. Then I heard the first noise. A single snap of a dry stick. Not natural movement, not an animal. It was the sound of weight on wood. My eyes opened immediately. The air felt sharp. I held the knife handle in my hand and listened. Then the footsteps started again. I decided to go on a camping trip alone because I felt like I had been surrounded by noise and people for too long. I wanted time where I could hear nothing but wind, trees, and maybe a river. I wanted to clear my mind and feel like I could breathe again. I picked a forest area well outside of town, several miles away from the nearest paved road. I checked maps, prepared supplies, packed gear, and left early in the morning. I did not tell many people where I was going because I wanted the silence to be complete. I wanted to be alone. The drive took almost 3 hours, and the road became thinner and rougher the deeper I went. My phone lost signal long before I reached the place I planned to start hiking. I parked the car at a small clearing, locked it, put on my backpack, and started walking. The forest was thick and green, with huge pine trees, ferns up to my knees, and long shadows stretching across the ground even though the sun was still high. The air smelled clean, like sap and dirt and cold wind. The only sounds were birds calling from somewhere high above, branches moving very slowly, and distant water. It was exactly the kind of silence I wanted. I walked for almost 2 hours before I found a flat area near a river that looked perfect for a campsite. The ground was level, the river was close but not so close that the tent would be at risk of flooding, and I could see open sky through a gap in the trees. I dropped my backpack, stretched my shoulders, and took a deep breath of the cold forest air. I set up my tent slowly, enjoying the process, hammering the stakes deep into the firm soil, tightening the lines, checking every angle like routine. The river made a constant soft sound, steady and calming, almost like whispering wind. Once the tent was done, I gathered dry branches and small pieces of wood for a fire. I built a small fire circle out of rocks and old fallen chunks of tree. The fire lit easily, crackling with bright orange flame that reflected off the silver river. I sat next to it, eating simple food from my backpack, looking at the darkening treeline and feeling completely at peace. I had not felt this calm in months. No machines, no people, no loud voices, just the sound of the river, the fire, and my own breathing. As the sun set, the forest grew darker and colder quickly. The temperature dropped sharply, and I put on a jacket and gloves while I added more wood to the fire. The sky turned orange behind the trees and then slowly purple and finally black, with only a sliver of moon hanging above the forest canopy. It felt like the whole world had turned silent. Even the birds stopped calling. The only sound was the low, steady run of the river and the slow cracking of the fire. It felt perfect. But around midnight, I began to notice something different. My fire had burned low, and the shadows around the camp grew sharp and tall. I was getting ready to put the fire out and head into the tent when I heard something from the trees on the opposite side of the river. It was soft at first, like something brushing against branches. I assumed it was some forest animal moving around, maybe a deer or raccoon. I did not panic. I just looked toward the area where the sound came from. The sound stopped. I waited, expecting it to start again, but there was only silence. Then something crackled in the darkness, a dry, snapping sound like a foot breaking a stick under weight. This sound was heavier, slower, and from much closer than I expected. I stared into the shadows but could not see anything. I had a flashlight in my pocket, and I switched it on, pointing the narrow beam across the river toward the treeline. I did not see eyes glowing back or any shape moving, just trees and shrubbery and tall pieces of dead grass. Still, something felt off. I could not explain it, but the forest felt different. It was too quiet, like the trees were listening. The feeling was subtle but strong enough to weigh in my chest. I decided to put out the fire and go into the tent. I poured water slowly over the embers until only steam rose. I kicked dirt over the circle to be sure. Then I crawled into the tent, zipped it shut, and laid on my sleeping bag. Inside the tent, the silence was even stronger. I could hear my heartbeat through my ears, and I waited for forest sounds. Wind, owls, insects, but heard almost nothing. Just the river, faint and distant. After a while, I drifted into sleep. But it was not deep sleep. It was the kind where you rest but stay aware, like your body is waiting for something. I woke up some time later, not sure how long I slept. The tent was cold, the air heavy, and I had the strong sense that something outside was different. I listened first. Nothing. I moved a little in the sleeping bag and waited. Then I heard it. A sound outside the tent. Light at first, then heavier. It sounded like slow footsteps on dirt and dry leaves, measured and deliberate. The kind of sound a human would make walking carefully in the dark. I lay completely still. The footsteps grew slightly louder, and I could tell they were coming from the same side of the river where I had heard the earlier sounds. My heart beat so hard that I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I did not want to move, not even an inch. I kept telling myself it could be an animal, maybe a bear or something else exploring the campsite. But the weight of the steps, the rhythm, and the pace did not feel like an animal. It felt like someone walking. The sound stopped directly outside the tent. I could feel the pressure of silence pushing against my ears. I waited, barely breathing. I could not see anything through the tent walls except faint shapes from the moonlight. Then something touched the tent. A light drag, like fingers brushing slowly along the fabric. That was the moment when I felt real fear. My stomach tightened, and my mouth went dry. No animal would run its hand slowly along a tent wall like that. I did not move. I just stared upward, waiting, listening. The dragging sound shifted from one side of the tent to the other, extremely slow, like someone was feeling the shape and size from the outside. Then it stopped. For almost 30 seconds, I heard nothing at all. Then there was a light sound, like someone crouching down in dirt. I could imagine something or someone just outside my thin nylon wall, waiting. My mind ran through every possibility. Maybe it was a lone hiker, maybe a hunter, maybe someone living illegally in the forest who saw my fire, or maybe someone who simply wanted to take advantage of a lone camper in the darkness. None of the thoughts made me feel better. I wished suddenly that I had camped closer to other people, or at least kept the fire going bright enough to see more clearly. The person or thing moved again, slower this time. I thought about grabbing something for defense, but all I had were tools, nothing that would give me confidence against someone with real intent. The footsteps grew faint again, like whoever was outside had begun to move away, but I could not be sure. I waited for the sounds to become distant, but after a few steps they stopped again. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds. Time felt thick and stretched. I forced myself to stay awake. I did not want to fall asleep and wake up to something worse. I stared at the tent ceiling until my eyes hurt. I listened until my ears rang. But eventually, slowly, exhaustion crept in and pulled me into a shallow sleep again. When I woke, it was still dark, but a faint hint of early morning light touched the tops of the trees outside. The forest was silent again. I listened for footsteps or movement but heard nothing. I unzipped the tent slowly and stepped outside. The ground was cold under my boots, and the forest air was freezing. I scanned the area around the tent. At first I saw nothing unusual, just trees and rocks and the dark line of the river. But then I noticed the ground. There were footprints in the dirt. Not animal tracks, not random markings. Footprints, human-sized, spaced like steps, circling the tent. I crouched down and looked closely. The tracks were fresh, still sharp around the edges. Someone really had been walking around my tent in the middle of the night. I felt my chest tighten and my throat dry. I looked toward the trees where the tracks led, but the forest swallowed the trail after just a few yards. Whoever had walked around my tent had left quietly and disappeared into the darkness. I began to question everything. Why would someone walk around a lone tent in the middle of the night without speaking or showing themselves? Why would they drag their hand along the fabric? Why would they not make their presence known? It did not feel like someone stumbling through the area or looking for help. It felt intentional. I decided I would not pack up yet. Instead, I sat by the river and tried to calm myself. The water looked peaceful, flowing over smooth stones with a constant low sound. The sky turned slowly from dark to pale blue, and sunlight finally reached the tops of the trees. The forest looked harmless again, like a normal cold mountain morning. But I could not shake the feeling that the trees were hiding someone just out of sight, someone who had already stood inches from me while I slept. I ate breakfast with shaking hands and then cleaned up carefully, trying to return to a normal mental state. I tried to tell myself that maybe it was just another camper messing around, maybe someone curious, but the tracks were too deliberate, too slow, and too close. I still had 2 more nights planned out there. I had enough food and water. I had mapped several nearby trails I wanted to hike and photograph. But after the night I had just experienced, I was already mentally weighing whether I should leave early. Part of me felt like leaving was the smart thing. Another part did not want to give in to fear not so quickly. I told myself I would stay at least 1 more night, but I would be alert. I would be careful. I spent most of the day hiking a trail that led uphill toward a ridge overlooking the valley. The hike took several hours and I focused on the simple rhythm of walking, breathing, moving forward. The trail was steep in many places, covered with loose gravel and sharp stones. My legs burned as I climbed, and the cold air dried my mouth. But when I reached the top, the view was wide and peaceful. The forest stretched endlessly, green and quiet, with deep valleys and high ridges fading into the horizon. Up there, in the sunlight, the night before felt distant, like something I had imagined. The fear faded a little. I took my time coming back to camp, moving slowly, exploring side paths, and enjoying how empty the forest was. I did not see a single other person the entire day. When I returned to camp in the late afternoon, everything looked untouched. My tent was still standing. My gear was where I had left it. The footprints from the night before were now slightly blurred by wind and small amounts of falling dirt. I gathered more wood while the sun was still high. I wanted a bigger fire that night, something bright and strong that would push back the shadows. As evening approached, I boiled water for food, organized my packs so everything was within reach, and set up my flashlight and tools in easy positions. The forest grew dark again, and the cold settled deeper. The fire crackled, burning hotter and brighter than the night before. I added more wood as soon as the flames lowered. I wanted light. I wanted to see anything approaching. Night came fully. The river ran quietly behind me, invisible in the dark but steady in sound. The firelight flickered across the trees, creating moving patterns on the trunks. I watched the forest carefully. Hours passed. Nothing happened. I began to think maybe the previous night had been a freak occurrence. Maybe it was just someone passing through. Around midnight, the fire was still strong, and I was finally beginning to relax when the quiet of the forest changed again. It was subtle, the kind of change you don't notice immediately, but feel, like the air itself was holding its breath. The wind slowed. No branches moved. The temperature seemed to drop even further. I stared across the river without moving. Then I heard it. A single crunch of leaves, then another. Slow, careful, deliberate. The same sound as before. My heart started pounding again. I had planned this camping trip for weeks, carefully choosing a spot deep in the forest where I could escape from the noise and people. The thought of being alone, surrounded by nothing but trees and the occasional bird or squirrel, felt freeing. I wasn't looking for adventure. I just wanted a place to think, breathe, and spend a few nights under the stars. I packed light but thoroughly. A tent, sleeping bag, food for 3 days, water, a first aid kit, a small camping stove, and a flashlight with extra batteries. I didn't think I needed anything else. I had my phone, of course, though I knew there might not be any signal once I got deep enough into the woods. I left early in the morning, driving until the roads became narrower, dirtier, and rougher, finally ending at a small, almost hidden trailhead. The forest around it was dense, with tall pines and oaks forming a thick canopy overhead. The sun filtered through in scattered, golden beams, and the air smelled damp and earthy, like the forest had just woken from a long sleep. I parked my car, took a deep breath, and slung my backpack over my shoulders. The hike in was steeper than I had anticipated. My legs burned as I climbed, my backpack heavy but manageable. Every few steps, I stopped to catch my breath and look around. The forest was silent in a way that almost felt unnatural, the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every snapping twig or rustle in the underbrush. Birds called out occasionally, but their songs felt distant, like they were coming from a different world entirely. I found the clearing I had marked on the map around mid-afternoon. It was small but open, with a flat stretch of ground surrounded by tall trees. There was a narrow stream nearby, water running clear and cold over smooth stones. It was perfect. I unpacked my gear and set up my tent, anchoring the stakes carefully into the damp soil. I stacked a small pile of firewood I found nearby, making sure I had enough for the evening. Everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect, but I pushed that thought away. As the sun began to lower in the sky, I started a fire. The first sparks flared up, then died, but on the third attempt I had a small flame licking at the kindling. The fire crackled, sending warmth and light into the clearing. I boiled some water for dinner, a simple meal of instant noodles, and sat watching the fire, feeling the tension of the hike slowly leave my body. Night came quickly. Darkness fell like a blanket, thick and absolute. The forest changed entirely. Sounds I hadn't noticed during the day, the chirping of crickets, the occasional rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, became louder, closer, almost threatening. The firelight danced on the trees, casting long, twisting shadows. I could hear the stream burbling faintly in the distance, a soothing sound that contrasted with the otherwise eerie quiet. I went to bed early. The sleeping bag was warm, the tent sturdy, but even inside, I felt exposed. Every little noise outside made me tense. I told myself it was just the forest, just animals, just the wind, but I couldn't stop my mind from imagining other possibilities. My flashlight sat on the small foldable table beside me, batteries fresh, ready. I tried to sleep, but the occasional snap of a branch nearby kept me half awake, ears straining. Around midnight, I woke to a sound I couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. A crunching of leaves, slow and careful, like someone or something was walking just beyond the clearing. My heart jumped. I stayed still, listening. Nothing else. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other forest animal. The woods were full of them. I waited a few minutes, then tried to go back to sleep. The sound returned, closer this time, and then I noticed something I hadn't before. Faint, low snapping sounds, like footsteps, circling the tent. Not fast, not frantic, but deliberate, slow. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on, sweeping the beam through the tent flap toward the dark trees. Nothing, just shadows, just trees. I debated what to do. Call someone? My phone had no signal. Stay quiet? But the footsteps kept circling. My mind raced through every possibility. The forest was supposed to be empty, Campsites were kilometers away. Nobody should be here. And yet, something was out there, moving slowly, deliberately. I grabbed my backpack and stuffed in some essentials. My knife, the flashlight, some water, a small pack of trail mix. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The forest was pitch black beyond the fire's glow. I scanned with the flashlight, every beam cutting through the darkness, but nothing. The footsteps had stopped. Not even a leaf rustled. I forced myself to move back toward the stream, thinking if I followed the water downhill, I might reach a trail. My flashlight flickered as I stepped carefully over roots and rocks. Every shadow looked like a person. Every tree looked like it could be hiding eyes. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might echo through the forest. Then I heard it. A clear, sharp snap of a branch, very close. My pulse spiked. I spun in the direction of the sound, and the beam of my flashlight caught a figure. Not fully visible, just a dark outline, tall, human-shaped, standing between the trees. I froze. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure didn't move either, just stood there watching silently. I forced my body to move and ran. I ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping at my face and arms, roots tripping me, mud sucking at my boots. Every few seconds, I dared a glance behind me, but the figure was gone. I didn't stop to think, didn't stop to breathe, just ran, heading downhill toward the sound of the stream. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the stream. I stumbled into the shallow water, the cold shock of it snapping me into focus. I followed the stream downstream, hoping it would lead to a trail or a road. The water ran quickly, cold and clear, and the forest on either side was dark and dense. I moved as quietly as I could now, trying not to make a sound that might draw attention. Hours seemed to pass. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but I kept moving. Finally, just as dawn began to break, I spotted a narrow dirt path cutting through the trees. Relief hit me like a wave. I followed it, keeping low, listening for any sound behind me. Nothing came. No footsteps, no snapping branches. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The path led me back to the trailhead where I had parked my car. The sunlight was weak but enough to see clearly. I collapsed on the ground, gasping, shaking, exhausted. The car looked like it had been untouched, normal, safe. I sat there for a long time, watching the forest edge, heart still racing. Whatever had been out there was gone, disappeared as suddenly as it appeared. I drove away without looking back. On the way home, I realized how unprepared I had been. I had underestimated the forest, underestimated the danger of isolation, underestimated how vulnerable I could feel when something or someone was out there unseen. I told myself I would never camp alone like that again, and that I had been lucky to get out safely. From that day on, I always planned trips with others, always carried more than one flashlight, extra batteries, and kept my phone charged. I studied the area ahead of time, mapped escape routes, and avoided any spot that felt too isolated. I learned to respect the forest, to respect the unknown, and to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, feeling the same fear I felt that night. I remember the dark outline between the trees, the snapping branches, the silence that followed. I never saw the person or thing again, but I know the forest can be unforgiving. And I know the sharp edge of fear, the kind that comes from knowing that even in a place you think is safe, you can be completely alone, completely exposed, and completely at the mercy of forces you cannot see. I never thought a simple camping trip could turn into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, but looking back now, I realize how unprepared I was. I had planned it as a weekend escape from work, a chance to get out into the woods, breathe fresh air, and disconnect from everything. I packed my old backpack the night before, carefully layering a small tent, a sleeping bag, a portable stove, extra clothes, a first aid kit, and a flashlight with spare batteries. I thought I was thorough. I thought I had everything I could need. I didn't. I drove to a forested area several hours away from the city. The road was long, winding, and full of narrow turns. but the sun was still high, and the air smelled faintly of pine and wet earth. I found a small clearing that seemed perfect. It was secluded but open enough for sunlight to reach, and the ground was flat and free of rocks or roots. I parked the car nearby, unpacked my gear, and started setting up the tent. The forest was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. It felt calm, almost too calm. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, but that peace was deceptive. Once the tent was up, I unpacked some food and water and started to explore the surrounding area. The terrain was uneven, with patches of mud and small streams cutting through it. I noticed footprints in the damp soil, some from animals, some that looked almost human but smaller. I dismissed it at the time, thinking someone else had been camping here recently. I walked for a few hours, making mental notes of landmarks and collecting firewood. By late afternoon, the sky began to darken. I returned to my site, started a small fire, and cooked some food. The warmth of the flames and the smell of cooked meat gave me a sense of security. But as night fell, I started to feel uneasy. Night in the forest is different from night in a city. In the city, even when it's dark, there's always light, people, cars, noise. In the forest, there is nothing but darkness, deep and heavy. Every sound is amplified. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of a coyote. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the flickering fire, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, that I was overreacting. It started with a faint noise, a soft scraping like something moving across the dirt, far enough away that it could have been an animal. I froze, listening. The sound stopped, then started again, closer this time. I told myself it was just a deer, maybe a raccoon looking for food. But the scraping continued, irregular, deliberate. My heart started beating faster, a cold sweat running down my back. I picked up my flashlight and aimed it toward the edge of the clearing, scanning the darkness. Nothing. I decided to check the perimeter of my camp. I carefully stepped out of the tent, my boots crunching on fallen leaves, and walked slowly around the area. Every crack of a branch under my weight made me flinch. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, but only for a few feet. I couldn't see much beyond it. Then I saw movement, a shadow moving between the trees. My first thought was a deer, but the movement was too deliberate, too silent. I couldn't tell how many, if it was alone, but my stomach dropped. I went back to the tent, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I was imagining things, tired and alone. I tried to sleep, but the noises grew louder, closer. Something was definitely moving around my camp, circling it. I could hear it stepping on sticks, shifting branches, brushing against trees. My flashlight batteries had been inside the tent, and I didn't want to leave it to grab them. I sat there in darkness, clutching a small pocket knife, listening to the sounds of someone or something watching me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt warped in the dark. The noises finally stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down on me. Every sense was heightened. I could hear my own breathing, the blood rushing in my ears, the distant stream gurgling. I stayed awake, too afraid to sleep, too afraid to move. Then I heard a crack, sharp and sudden, right outside the tent. Something was stepping on my firewood pile. I could feel the vibrations through the ground. I couldn't stay in the tent. I grabbed my backpack, throwing on my jacket, stuffing the flashlight and knife inside. I decided to leave. I didn't know who or what was outside, but staying was no longer an option. I ran toward my car, not looking back, tripping over roots and mud, my heart hammering in my chest. I reached the car, breathless, shaking. I fumbled with the keys, finally starting the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me, but when I blinked, it was gone. I drove for an hour, keeping my eyes on the road, but the feeling of being followed stayed with me. I called the local ranger station as soon as I could, explaining my location and the noises I heard, but they told me it was probably just a bear or a deer. I wanted to argue, to tell them what I saw, but I didn't. I was too shaken. I decided to stay in a hotel that night, too afraid to return to the woods. The next day, I returned to the clearing in daylight, hoping to make sense of what happened. The footprints I had noticed earlier were still there, fresh, leading into the forest but none returning. My firewood was scattered, trampled, as if someone had deliberately walked through my camp. There was no evidence of animals eating my food or marking territory. I couldn't explain it. I realized that the forest could be dangerous, not because of monsters or ghosts, but because humans could be unpredictable and dangerous, and being alone made me vulnerable. I reported the incident to the ranger station again, and they advised me not to camp alone in that area. I never went back. I learned that being prepared for nature wasn't just about tents, food, or water. It was also about understanding your surroundings, the possibility of encountering other people, and the risk that comes with isolation. It was terrifying, but I survived, and I made a promise to myself to never underestimate the real dangers of the woods again. That experience changed the way I approached camping and hiking. I always went with friends after that, checked the area thoroughly, and stayed alert at all times. The forest had shown me that danger could come in many forms, and sometimes it didn't need to be supernatural or fantastical. It could be as simple and terrifying as another human in the wrong place at the wrong time. I never forgot the look of that shadow, the way it moved just beyond the light, and the way it reminded me that the wilderness is beautiful but never completely safe. I went camping alone deep in the northern forest in early autumn, choosing a place that was far away from normal hiking trails and hunting routes, a place where people almost never went. I wanted silence, privacy, and a chance to just disconnect from everything in my life. I had been dealing with long work hours, stress, and constant noise, and I felt like I needed time alone in nature to reset my mind. I packed everything I needed for 4 days. A large backpack, small tent, ultralight sleeping bag, water filter, food, a small axe, a knife, a thick flashlight, spare batteries, a small medical kit, a map, and a compass. I avoided phones because I wanted to feel detached from the world. I only brought one switched off inside the pack as an emergency backup. The forest was huge, stretching for many miles, filled with tall trees, thick undergrowth, steep slopes, and long valleys that were quiet even during daylight. The smell of pine needles covered the air and the ground felt soft under my boots. I followed a narrow game trail for about 2 hours, climbing slowly uphill until I reached a spot between tall old trees where the ground looked clear enough for a tent. There was no trash, no signs of campfires, no footprints, nothing at all to show another person had been there for a long time. I liked that. I felt completely alone in a natural place that did not feel touched by humans. I set up the tent near a fallen log, cleared a small area for a fire, and gathered wood. The air felt cool but not cold, quiet but not silent. I heard small sounds in the woods around me, birds moving in branches, insects buzzing, and squirrels running across leaves. I took a deep breath and felt myself already starting to relax. I made a small fire around sunset, ate a simple meal, and watched the light fade through the tall tree trunks. The forest slowly darkened, the air cooled even more, and the sounds of daytime faded away. I crawled into the tent, zipped it up, and lay in my sleeping bag. At first, the darkness felt peaceful. I could hear the wind moving slowly through the treetops and the soft creak of branches moving. But after about an hour of lying there, the forest changed. The night sounds disappeared. It wasn't gradual. It was sudden. One moment I heard normal forest noises. The next moment there was absolute silence, like the woods were holding their breath. That silence made me feel uneasy even though I tried to tell myself it was normal. I lay still, listening, waiting for something to break the quiet. Nothing did. I rolled over and tried to sleep, but my body felt tense. Then I heard something. It was faint but real. Dry leaves moving. Slow steps. The sound wasn't heavy like a large animal. It was slow, controlled, like something was trying not to make noise. I stayed still, breathing slowly, listening. The steps stopped. Then nothing. I felt the air inside the tent heat from my own breath as I listened carefully to the silence outside. I waited for the sound to return, but it didn't. After a long time, my body finally relaxed again. I closed my eyes and eventually fell asleep. I woke before sunrise. The forest looked normal again. Nothing around the tent was disturbed. I told myself it was probably a fox or a raccoon moving around during the night. I packed some food for the day and went hiking deeper into the forest. I followed a ridge with a steep drop on one side and thick trees on the other. The ground was covered with dry leaves and pine needles, and the forest smelled damp and fresh. Sunlight came in through the trees in long, thin beams that made the dust in the air visible as it drifted. I felt calm again. It was the feeling I had come out there to experience. Around midday, I reached a rocky area where the trees thinned out. I found a flat area of stone and sat down to drink water. That was when I saw something strange. On the far side of the clearing, near a line of broken rocks, there was a small circle of stones set in a perfect ring. They weren't scattered naturally. They were arranged by a human hand. I walked closer and noticed something else. Inside that ring was a burnt patch of rock, dark black and still smelling faintly of smoke. It was old, maybe days old, maybe weeks, but someone had used that spot as a fire pit not long ago. I had chosen this forest because almost no one camped here. Seeing signs of someone else made the place feel different. Not dangerous yet, but not as private as I had assumed. I stood still, looking at the ground around it. No footprints I could see. No gear left behind. No trash. Just that simple fire ring. Maybe someone like me had camped here and left. I pushed the thought out of my head and continued hiking until late afternoon. When I returned to my tent, the feeling of isolation returned. I gathered more firewood before dark and sat near the small fire, eating and watching the flames twist in the air. The sun set slowly and the temperature dropped. I retreated into the tent when it got too cold to sit outside. The inside of the tent felt warm from my body heat and I began to relax again. But just like the night before, the forest went silent again. Not gradually, abruptly. The sudden silence felt even more unnatural this time because I noticed it immediately. I stopped breathing for a moment and listened. No insects, no wind, no branches, nothing. This time, it felt like something was waiting. Then the footsteps returned. Soft, measured, slow. Not directly beside my tent, but moving through the trees. Leaves crushed under weight, then silence. Then another step, then another. I felt the pressure of fear settle heavily in my chest. I listened for a long time as the steps circled slowly through the woods. They never got very close, but they didn't go away either. The movement lasted maybe 10 minutes, then stopped completely. I waited for a long time before I fell asleep, but the uneasiness stayed with me. When I woke early in the morning, I noticed something strange. A long branch had been placed across the trail leading to my campsite. It wasn't a random fallen limb. It had been placed. It lay across the path like a marker or a warning. The branch was too heavy to have rolled there by accident. I looked around and the forest felt different in daylight, like I wasn't alone out there. I turned and scanned the trees, trying to see any sign of movement. Nothing moved. No birds. No animals. The woods were strangely quiet even in daytime. I didn't like how that felt. I walked over to the branch, lifted it and dragged it aside. The ground beneath it had fresh dirt scraped where it had been placed. Someone had put it there not long before I woke up. I spent the rest of the day hiking again, farther this time. I wanted to see if there were more signs of someone else camping nearby. Hours went by and I saw nothing but untouched forest. No footprints, no trash, no campsites, no tools, nothing. It made the single fire ring and the branch at my camp seem even more out of place. As the afternoon light dimmed, I felt tired and returned to my campsite. When I arrived, I froze. My tent was still standing, but something was leaning against the tree next to it. At first I thought it was just a stick, but then I realized it was arranged intentionally. Someone had propped a small bundle of dry grass and twigs at eye level against the tree trunk, tied together with a thin strip of bark. It wasn't a natural formation. Someone had crafted it. My heartbeat got loud in my ears. I stepped closer and looked more carefully. It was simple, like a primitive marker or sign. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it, feeling the hair on the back of my neck rise. Someone had been at my camp while I was gone. Not an animal. A human. Someone was watching or tracking me. I stood in the clearing for a long time, unable to move. The air felt colder. The forest around me looked different. I no longer felt like I was out there alone. I grabbed the twig bundle and threw it far into the trees. Then I checked inside the tent. Nothing had been disturbed. My pack was still closed. My food was untouched. Whoever had come hadn't stolen anything. They had just left a sign. I ate quickly, not enjoying my food, and sat near the fire, trying to decide what to do. I could leave immediately, hike back toward the road, and end the trip early. But it was late. Hiking in darkness through steep woods with no clear trail could lead to injury or getting lost. That felt even more dangerous. I stayed at camp, but I didn't feel calm at all. As the last light disappeared, I got into the tent and lay still. I didn't sleep. I listened. The silence came again. The same sudden drop of all sound. Then the footsteps returned. This time they came closer. I had been planning the trip for months. I wanted a break from the city, from the constant noise and pressure, from the endless screens and people. I needed silence, solitude, and the kind of deep calm that only comes when you are surrounded by nothing but trees, rocks, and the faint scent of earth and water. I packed my backpack carefully. Tent, sleeping bag, small stove, some canned food, water, a first aid kit, and a flashlight with extra batteries. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going. My friends were used to my solo adventures, but they still asked questions I didn't want to answer. I had my reasons. Some things are safer when no one knows them. The trailhead was about a 3-hour drive from the city. By the time I arrived, the sun was already low, spilling orange light across the forest. I parked the car and double-checked my gear. My heart was racing, not with fear, but with the excitement that always comes before stepping into complete isolation. I locked the car, slung the backpack over my shoulders, and stepped onto the dirt path. The first stretch of trail was familiar, well-worn, and easy. Birds were singing, and the air smelled clean and sharp. I kept moving at a steady pace, trying to cover enough ground to reach a good camping spot before dark. About 2 hours in, I came to a small clearing beside a creek. The water ran cold and clear, tumbling over rocks. The place was perfect. Flat ground, a few large stones I could use for a fire pit, and thick trees surrounding it that would block the wind. I set my backpack down and began to unpack. I laid out my tent, hammered the stakes into the soil, and assembled the rainfly. Even though the weather forecast had been clear, I knew storms could appear suddenly in the mountains. By the time the tent was set up, the sun was dipping behind the tree line, and the forest began to darken rapidly. I gathered some dry wood and twigs near the creek to start a fire. I wanted warmth, light, and a sense of security. Even in the middle of a forest, fire changes everything. It makes the darkness seem less threatening, even if just a little. I arranged the kindling, struck a match, and soon flames were dancing in the pit. Smoke drifted through the trees, and the crackling sound filled the clearing. I sat on a flat rock, feeling the heat on my face, and drank some water while eating a small snack. Night came faster than I expected. The temperature dropped sharply, and shadows moved in strange ways under the flickering firelight. I double-checked the tent zipper, then crawled inside my sleeping bag. Outside, the forest was alive with sounds. The distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of small animals through the underbrush, the occasional thump of falling branches. I tried to calm myself, reminding myself that I was prepared, that I was careful, that none of this was dangerous in the normal sense. But even with those thoughts, I couldn't shake a creeping sense of unease. Around midnight, I woke to a sound I didn't recognize immediately. It was subtle at first, a dragging, scraping sound from somewhere outside the tent. I froze. My flashlight was on the small table beside my sleeping bag, and I considered grabbing it, but I didn't want to step out into the darkness. The sound repeated, slow and deliberate, like something large moving through the forest. My mind ran through possibilities. An animal, a fallen branch, nothing. But the sound was too rhythmic, too intentional to be natural. I stayed still for what felt like an eternity, listening. Then it stopped. I convinced myself it had been the wind, or maybe a deer, and eventually drifted back to sleep. When I woke again, it was early morning. The sun hadn't fully risen, but there was enough light to see clearly. Nothing seemed out of place. My fire pit was cold, my tent intact, my gear exactly where I left it. I ate a small breakfast, packed some water, and decided to take a short hike along the creek before breaking camp completely. I wanted to stretch my legs and enjoy the scenery. The forest was quiet but alive. Birds chirped, insects hummed, and the creek gurgled over rocks. I walked carefully along the narrow trail, keeping my eyes on the ground and listening to the subtle noises of the woods. About an hour in, I noticed something strange. Footprints in the mud along the creek's edge. They were large, irregular, and not human. I crouched to inspect them. My stomach sank. Whoever, or whatever, had made these prints had passed very close to my camp during the night. The realization was chilling. I traced them back toward my campsite and confirmed what I had feared. The prints led directly to the area where I had slept. I had not noticed any signs of someone or something else when I arrived, so this had happened after I set up camp. Panic started to build, but I forced myself to stay calm. I packed the hike quickly, keeping an eye on the forest, and returned to my campsite. Nothing had been disturbed, nothing stolen, and there were no other signs of intruders. I didn't sleep much that night. Every rustle, every snap of a branch made me tense. I kept my flashlight close, my knife within reach, and my pack ready in case I needed to move fast. The following day, I tried to push the fear aside and focused on survival. I gathered more firewood, filtered water from the creek, and explored slightly further along the trail to familiarize myself with the area. I noted landmarks: a twisted pine tree, a large boulder near the creek, a small patch of moss that looked like it could be used as a signal marker. I told myself that knowledge of the area gave me control, and control was the only way to stay safe. Late in the afternoon, I noticed something else. My firewood pile had been tampered with. Some sticks were moved, not far, but clearly altered from the way I had stacked them. My stomach dropped again. I realized that whatever had been nearby the night before might still be around. I had thought it could be an animal, but now, seeing the deliberate disturbance of my supplies, it had to be a human. Someone had been in the area, watching, maybe even studying me. The thought was terrifying, but I refused to panic. I reinforced my tent, hid some food, and made a mental plan for leaving at first light. That night, I barely slept at all. I listened to every sound, ready to grab my pack and move if I had to. The dragging noise returned, closer this time. I heard footsteps crunching leaves near my tent. I held my breath, pretending to be asleep. The footsteps paused, circled the tent, and then walked away. I could not see anything, but the sound was enough. My heart raced. My mind screamed at me to move, but I forced myself to remain still until the footsteps faded completely. At dawn, I didn't wait. I packed everything as fast as possible, leaving nothing behind that could weigh me down. I stayed alert, moving silently along the trail. I kept checking over my shoulder. Every shadow made me tense. Every sound set my nerves on edge. About 2 hours into the hike back to my car, I realized I was being followed. I heard the snapping of small branches and soft footsteps, deliberately matching my pace. I increased my speed slightly, taking care not to run, knowing that sudden movement could provoke whoever or whatever it was. I found a fallen tree to hide behind, pressed myself against it, and waited. The footsteps continued, circling around the area. After what felt like an hour, the sounds faded, and I made a careful decision to sprint the rest of the way to the car. When I finally reached the parking area, my relief was overwhelming. I locked the doors, kept the engine running, and sat there, shaking, until I could collect myself. I called the authorities to report the incident and gave them the location. The officer who responded told me that similar reports had been made in the area. People camping alone had been watched, supplies moved or intimidated, but rarely harmed physically. It was days before I could stop replaying every detail in my head. I went through my photos, maps, and trail notes. I realized how easily things could have gone wrong. But I also realized that my careful preparation, gear, knowledge of the area, staying calm, planning an escape, had likely saved me. I didn't return to that forest alone. When I did camp again, it was with a friend and extra precautions. I never forgot the fear, the creeping sense that I was being watched, and the relief that came with surviving it. It taught me that nature is not always the enemy, but isolation can make you vulnerable in ways you don't anticipate. Even now, months later, when I hike or camp, I carry the lessons with me. Always tell someone your location, always be prepared, and always trust your instincts. Sometimes the scariest things are not animals, storms, or darkness. They are other people, and the unknown intentions they may have. I survived that camping trip, and I am grateful for every careful decision I made. I also never underestimate the quiet intensity of the woods again. There is beauty there, yes, but there is also caution, and the memory of that night is a reminder that awareness is survival. I had planned the camping trip for months. I wanted to escape the city, leave behind the constant noise, and spend a few days in complete isolation, surrounded only by trees, rocks, and the quiet of nature. I had been hiking before, but never this far into the wilderness. The map I used marked trails, streams, and small clearings where it might be safe to camp. I packed carefully: tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a first aid kit, and a small stove. I also brought a flashlight and extra batteries just in case. The morning I left, the sky was overcast, and there was a faint chill in the air, the kind that makes the skin tingle and the mind more alert. The drive took hours, and as I got closer to the trailhead, the paved roads ended, replaced by dirt paths pocked with potholes and scattered rocks. I parked my car at the edge of the forest and double-checked my gear. Everything was heavy but necessary. My plan was simple: hike in for several miles, find a clearing near a stream, set up camp, spend 2 nights, and hike back out. I wanted to feel alone, but not lost. The first few hours were fine. The forest was dense, but the trail was clear. Birds called to each other, and the occasional rustle in the underbrush reminded me I was not entirely alone. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in slivers, lighting up patches of moss and leaves. I moved carefully, trying not to slip on wet roots or loose stones. Every now and then, I paused to drink water or take a photograph. I was alone, yes, but I felt safe. By late afternoon, I had reached a fork in the trail. One path followed the map's marked route to the clearing I had chosen. The other path seemed less traveled, narrower, and overgrown. I remembered my map, and I remembered my plan. I took the main path. After another hour, I found the small clearing near a stream. It was perfect. The ground was flat, the grass soft, and the stream ran gently, its water clear and cold. I set up my tent and arranged my gear. The sun was already dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing. I collected some dry wood for a fire, small branches and twigs that snapped easily under my fingers. The first night was quiet. I cooked a small meal, ate, and then sat by the fire until my legs and shoulders began to ache. The sound of the stream was calming, almost hypnotic. When I finally crawled into my sleeping bag, I felt the first real chill of the night. I left my flashlight within reach and tried to sleep. The forest, though silent in the city, was alive with small noises: branches falling, animals moving through the underbrush, leaves rustling in the wind. I told myself it was normal, nothing more. Around midnight, I woke. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the temperature had dropped further. I could see my breath in the dim light. I had a strange sense that something was different, not immediately threatening, but odd. The forest had grown still. Even the stream sounded quieter, as if muffled. I got out of the tent to add more wood to the fire. As I crouched near the embers, I heard it. A distinct snap of a branch, sharp and deliberate, not like the random cracks of falling branches. It was close, too close. I froze, listening. The forest around me was silent again, except for the soft trickle of water. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the way the snap had come, purposeful, made my stomach tighten. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it around the clearing. Nothing. I shone it toward the tree line. Still nothing. Just the black shapes of trees against the night sky. I tried to calm myself. I was alone, in the middle of the forest, miles from the nearest road. If someone was here, I couldn't rely on anyone coming to help. My mind raced. I packed the fire embers back with dirt to hide the light and decided to stay inside my tent. I lay awake for hours, listening. Every sound was amplified. A rustle to the left, the faint hiss of the stream, the wind in the branches. Then, unmistakably, I heard footsteps. Not the soft, random padding of an animal, but heavy, deliberate steps. They were approaching the clearing. My heart pounded. I grabbed my flashlight and my small camping knife, holding both tightly. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the clearing. Whoever or whatever it was just there, waiting, listening. I stayed perfectly still. My mind ran through possibilities. Someone lost? A hiker who had wandered off the trail? Or someone with worse intentions? The seconds stretched, each one dragging my heartbeat into my ears. I could feel the sweat on my back and neck. Then the footsteps retreated. Slow, careful, but retreating. I stayed in my tent the rest of the night, awake, listening, tense, imagining every scenario. Morning could not come fast enough. When the first light touched the trees, I cautiously exited the tent, knife in hand. The clearing was empty. The stream ran as usual. There were no footprints, no traces of anyone. Only the small pile of twigs I had collected for the fire remained slightly disturbed, as if someone had brushed past them. I decided to break camp immediately. I packed everything carefully, avoiding leaving any trace behind. I followed the trail back, eyes constantly scanning, listening. Every crack of a branch, every shadow made me jump. Hours passed. My pace quickened, adrenaline keeping me moving faster than normal. I reached my car, and when I finally saw it, I felt a wave of relief that I could not describe. I locked the doors and sat inside, letting the engine run and the heat fill the space. I was safe for now. The trip left a mark on me. I had wanted solitude, but I realized the wilderness, while beautiful, could be dangerous in ways you cannot always predict. People, too, could be dangerous. From that day on, I never went camping alone without letting someone know exactly where I would be, what time I would return, and carrying extra means to signal for help. I had always thought of myself as prepared when it came to camping. I had done solo trips before, usually in well-known forests with trails and cell service. But this time I wanted something more remote, something that felt wild and untouched. I packed my backpack with care. A durable tent, a thick sleeping bag, enough food for 4 days, a first aid kit, a portable stove, and a small hatchet. I had my water purification tablets, a headlamp, extra batteries, and even a heavy-duty knife strapped to my belt. I left my phone at home because I wanted to disconnect completely. It was late summer, the kind of time when the sun still burned through the sky but the nights hinted at a creeping cold. The drive to the trailhead took longer than expected. The GPS had trouble navigating, and I had to rely on printed maps I had marked with the area I intended to explore. The final stretch was a dirt road, barely wide enough for my car, lined with dense trees that blocked any sunlight. I parked at a small clearing where the road ended, noting a tiny sign that warned of rough terrain ahead. From here, I was on foot. The first day was exhausting. My backpack felt heavier with every step. I moved through thick underbrush, over fallen logs, and across shallow streams. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. Birds chirped occasionally, but there were no other hikers, no distant shouts, no cars. Just the sound of my own boots crunching on the dirt and leaves. By late afternoon, I found a small clearing near a creek that seemed suitable for camping. It had enough flat ground for my tent, and the water source nearby would make cooking and hydration easier. I set up the tent carefully, making sure the stakes were deep and the rain fly tight. I stacked some firewood, careful to pick only dead branches, and lit a small fire using matches I had kept dry in a plastic bag. The fire crackled, sending warm orange light dancing across the surrounding trees. I cooked a small dinner of instant rice and dried vegetables, washing it down with water from the creek after filtering it with my tablets. By the time I finished, the sun was almost gone, leaving only the faint pink of the horizon. I brushed my teeth with my travel toothbrush, checked my gear one last time, and crawled into my sleeping bag, feeling both tired and uneasy. The forest was darker than I had expected, and the shadows seemed to move in ways that made me slightly anxious. The first night was restless. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the leaves, made me sit up. I reminded myself that it was just animals, deer, raccoons, maybe a fox. But when I heard heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, on the dirt path not far from my tent, I froze. The sound didn't belong to a deer or any small animal. It was heavier, closer to the sound of a human walking. I didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. The footsteps circled the clearing slowly, and then, almost as suddenly as they started, they stopped. The forest went quiet again. I stared into the darkness, heart pounding, and eventually convinced myself it had been my imagination. Maybe it was an echo, a trick of the night. Sleep came in short bursts, interrupted by the occasional rustle and the persistent fear that someone, or something, was watching. Morning didn't bring much relief. I packed up my tent, trying to appear calm, but my hands trembled slightly as I stuffed the sleeping bag. I decided to push deeper into the forest that day, following a narrow animal trail I had noticed near the creek. It was harder going than expected. Steep inclines, thorny bushes, and slippery rocks made every step a challenge. By midday, I stopped to rest on a large fallen log, eating a small snack and drinking water. That's when I noticed something odd. A set of footprints in the soft soil by the trail. They were human and they were fresh. I stared at them, comparing them to mine, counting the steps, noting the direction. Whoever it was, they had passed not long before me, heading deeper into the woods. My stomach sank. I wasn't sure if I should feel relief that it was someone else or panic because it meant I wasn't truly alone. I looked around, but the forest swallowed everything beyond a few dozen feet. No cars, no hikers, nothing. Just trees and shadows. I decided to follow the trail, partly out of curiosity and partly out of caution. The trail led me to a small ravine with a slow-moving creek. I paused here to refill my water bottle and rest. As I crouched by the water, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and coming from the opposite side of the ravine. I froze, holding my breath, trying to locate the sound. Then, as if my presence had been acknowledged, the footsteps stopped. Silence fell again. I couldn't see anyone, but the knowledge that someone else was in this remote forest, just out of sight, made my skin crawl. I hastily refilled my water, finished my snack, and moved on, keeping the creek to my left and my senses heightened. As evening approached, I realized I had lost the animal trail. The forest here was thicker, almost suffocating, and the sky was darkening faster than I expected. I knew I needed to find a place to set up camp, but the terrain was rough. Rocks, fallen branches, and steep banks made it difficult to find flat ground. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small clearing surrounded by a dense cluster of pines. It was far from ideal, but it would have to do. I set up the tent quickly, using my hatchet to clear some of the underbrush. The fire was harder to start this time. The wood was damp in the shaded clearing. After multiple attempts, I managed a small flame that barely kept the chill away. I cooked another simple meal, my hands shaking slightly from exhaustion and the creeping fear of being alone in the forest. The darkness pressed in, the forest sounds amplified, and I felt completely exposed. Around midnight, the fear became unbearable. Something was out there. I could hear it moving, something heavy, not small animals. It wasn't like the footsteps from the first night. This was closer, almost at the edge of the clearing. I stayed perfectly still, straining my ears. Leaves crunched, twigs snapped. Whatever it was, it circled my tent, never coming too close but never leaving either. My mind raced. I had a knife, a small hatchet, a tent, and my fire, but none of that felt like enough. I wanted to call for help, but I had no signal, and screaming felt useless. Hours passed like this, each one stretching painfully long. Eventually, fatigue overcame fear, and I fell into a restless, dreamless sleep, the sound of movement never far from my ears. I always thought camping alone in the mountains would help clear my mind, especially after months of stress and being around too many people. I wanted silence, open space, and time to breathe. I picked a place that many people talked about online, a stretch of remote forest land deep beyond a set of mountains. It was not a tourist area with signs or campgrounds. It was just pure land, untouched woods, steep ridges, long trails, and quiet nights with no vehicles or houses around. I liked the idea of being completely alone for a weekend. I parked my car at the far end of a rough dirt road that looked barely used. There were deep tire marks from maybe trucks or ATVs, but they looked old and faded. The trees around the parking area were tall, thick, and covered with dark moss and vines that looked like they had been growing there for many years. I packed everything from the back: my tent, sleeping bag, water, food, a small camping stove, rope, flashlight, knife, clothes, and a map I printed from online. The map showed old logging paths that had not been maintained for decades. That detail did not worry me. Actually, it made the place even more interesting. I liked the idea of following abandoned roads that once had life and noise but were now silent. I walked for hours uphill through thick trees, shrubs, and slopes that made me sweat even in relatively cool weather. The air smelled different from the city, earthy, wet, and natural. I could hear nothing except birds, distant insects, and the sound of small branches snapping under my boots. Hiking alone like that made me feel small but free at the same time. The deeper I walked, the more isolated everything became. There was no cell reception, no faint sounds of roads or planes, nothing artificial, just pure land stretching everywhere. After several hours, I found a good place to camp. It was on a flat patch of ground between thick trees and a narrow stream that ran downhill over rocks. The ground looked dry, and there were no dead trees leaning overhead that could fall on me during the night. I set up my tent and placed all my gear properly. Sunlight passed through the top branches, leaving moving patches of light on the forest floor. Everything seemed calm, peaceful, and exactly what I wanted. I gathered wood, set up a small fire, and boiled water. The smoke rose into the air slowly and disappeared between the trees. I sat down on a large rock, ate a simple meal, drank plenty of water, and listened to the sounds of the forest growing deeper as evening came. Birds slowly went quiet, insects took over, and the wind through the trees sounded lower and more constant. The first night felt good. I was tired but relaxed. When I finally went inside the tent and laid down, the ground felt firm, and the sleeping bag felt comfortable. I fell asleep fast. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up for no reason. I could not understand why, but my body just snapped awake. I listened to the forest outside, expecting maybe the sound of an animal or wind, but everything was completely silent. Too silent. I could not hear crickets or the stream I camped near, even though it had been loud earlier. I lay still and waited for my ears to adjust. After a minute, I finally heard the water again, but it sounded farther away than before, like something in the environment around me had changed. I told myself I was just imagining things because I woke up suddenly. The next morning, I got out of the tent and stretched. The ground was covered with fresh drops from humidity and dew. My gear looked untouched. Everything seemed fine. I made a simple breakfast and prepared for a day hike farther into the mountains. I planned to be back before evening. I took only what I needed and left heavier supplies back at the camp. The day hike went fine for the first few hours. I followed narrow, overgrown paths and found broken down wooden posts that might once have held signs long ago. They were rotting and covered in moss. The deeper I walked, the more wild everything became. I saw large animal tracks, maybe deer, maybe something bigger. I saw claw marks on trees that were higher than a human shoulder. That made me look around more. I had seen wildlife before, but something about the marks made me alert. The forest felt huge and empty, but not lifeless. Something shared the land with me. Around afternoon, I started heading back. I wanted to return before dark. The sun was still high enough, but shadows under the trees always made the time feel later than it was. By the time I reached camp, the sun was already lowering. I made dinner, sat by the fire again, and tried to relax. I stretched my legs and looked around. The forest was so thick that even the firelight barely reached more than 20 feet before the darkness swallowed everything beyond it. That night, I woke up again suddenly. This time, I knew what woke me. I heard footsteps outside. They were slow, heavy, and close. They stepped on twigs and soft ground, and the sound carried through the walls of my tent like something large was moving around. My heart pounded. I stayed perfectly still and waited. The footsteps stopped, then silence. I lay there and listened for any breathing or movement, but everything went dead quiet again. After a long time, I finally heard the forest noises return. Wind, insects, the stream. I did not sleep much after that. In the morning, I got out of the tent and looked around. I saw nothing unusual at first, but when I walked around the camp area, I noticed footprints in soft dirt near the stream. They looked large and deep, too large for a normal hiker. I felt uneasy. I knew wildlife could walk through camp, but these prints made me think of something bigger than deer, something with weight behind it. I looked closer. The shape was not clear enough to identify, but I knew I was not alone in the area. I tried to shake off the feeling. Many people camp where large animals live. It is normal. I continued with my day. I walked around the forest near camp and explored more fallen trees, rocks, and natural paths. But even when I tried to distract myself, I kept noticing small signs of something in the area. Broken branches had fresh breaks, as if something heavy had leaned against them. Rocks were overturned. Some tree bark had deeper scratches. The forest felt like it was holding a presence I could not see directly but could sense. By afternoon, I decided to collect more wood before the light disappeared. I walked farther out than usual, picking dry branches and stacking them in my arms. The forest floor was soft, covered in old leaves and pine needles. The air felt cooler. I went about collecting wood slowly until a sharp smell caught my nose. It smelled like rot, blood, and something musky. I stopped. The smell was strong, like a dead animal was nearby. I looked around, but I did not see anything. The smell made my stomach tense. I followed the scent a little, carefully stepping through undergrowth. Then I saw something ahead on the ground near a fallen tree. It was a badly torn deer carcass. The body was ripped open, and pieces were spread around. The scene looked violent and fresh. Whatever killed it did so with force. I stood there, staring, and felt the forest fall silent around me again. I finally turned and walked away quickly with the wood still in my arms. I made sure to walk straight back to camp without stopping. The forest did not feel peaceful anymore. It felt like something watched the land, including me. That night, I did not make a fire. I did not want light or smoke attracting anything. I ate inside the tent quietly and tried to stay calm. I listened to the sounds outside, every rustle and crack making my body tense. When I finally lay down to sleep, I hoped exhaustion would take over like the first night. But sleep did not come easily. After what felt like hours, I heard movement again. Not footsteps this time. Something brushing past branches, slow and steady. The sound moved behind the tent and then stopped. My heartbeat grew loud in my ears. I tried to breathe as quietly as possible. I could feel something near the tent wall, close enough that only the thin fabric separated us. Then I heard another sound, low, heavy breathing, like something larger than a human trying to control its air. I stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, the sound moved away, branches shifting again. I heard slow steps leaving and fading into the distance. I did not sleep at all after that. In the morning, I unzipped the tent slowly, expecting to see something torn or damaged. The tent was fine, but around the camp, I saw deep footprints again. They circled the area and passed behind the tent, exactly where I heard the breathing. My stomach felt tight, and my hands shook slightly. I knew clearly something big had been outside in the night, and it was curious enough to come close. At that point, my instinct told me to pack up and leave. But the sun was out, and nothing moved around me. I tried to calm down and think rationally. Maybe the animal was only passing by. Maybe I was in its territory without knowing. If I stayed cautious, maybe I could finish the trip and leave the next day as planned. I spent the day keeping close to camp, not hiking far. I boiled more water, checked my gear, organized my supplies, and watched the forest carefully. I noticed how often the woods went silent. It happened many times that day, like something moving caused every bird and insect to go quiet. Each time it happened, the silence lasted long enough to make me feel watched. When dusk came, I faced the reality that I had to go through another night. I felt tired but alert. My nerves were stretched thin. I went into the tent earlier than usual, zipped it, and tried to stay as small and quiet as possible. I did not eat much. My stomach was too tight with anxiety. In the darkness, every sound became sharp. The forest wind grew stronger, pushing the tent sides lightly. I could hear branches swaying and the creek running. Hours passed. I was not asleep, just lying with my eyes open, waiting. Eventually, movement came again. Slow steps approached from the same direction as before. They stopped at the tree line near the tent. I could not see anything through the dark fabric, but I could feel the presence. My body reacted before my mind could think. My breath became shallow, and sweat formed on my palms. Then something new happened. I heard sniffing. It was close, right outside the tent, as if something was trying to pick up my scent. The breathing was loud and heavy, and the sniffing sounded wet and powerful. I stayed completely still. My heart felt like it was shaking inside my chest. The sniffing moved slowly along the side of the tent, inches from where my head rested. My whole body tensed, expecting something to tear through the tent wall. I did not move even a finger. After several long seconds, the sniffing stopped. The breathing faded, and I heard branches moving as the thing walked away once again. But that did not relax me. This time, I knew something was changing. Whatever lived in the forest had now come several times, and each time it got closer. It was learning about me, smelling me, circling my camp at night. I did not know what it was or what it wanted, but I knew it was not random anymore. It was intentional. I waited awake for the sunrise. I always enjoyed doing things alone. I liked the peace, the quiet, the feeling of disconnecting from everything around me. I never needed anyone to go out with me, because I always believed I could keep myself safe and calm no matter where I was. That confidence was the reason I decided to go camping alone in a national forest area far away from the city. I picked a place that was not a known camping spot because I didn't want people around me. I just wanted trees, fresh air, and open space. I checked maps and satellite images for days. I looked at every small detail: dirt roads, stream routes, old logging paths, forest density, elevation. I planned everything carefully and thought nothing could surprise me. I packed gear that I trusted. One strong tent, a sleeping bag, food for 3 days, a cooking pot, a sharp knife, hiking boots, a water filter bottle, 2 flashlights, a lighter and matches, a raincoat, and a small first aid kit. I checked every item twice before placing it in my backpack. I felt prepared for anything, and that confidence made everything feel easy. I drove into the forest early in the morning. The paved road turned into a rough gravel trail, and then eventually into a narrow dirt road with tall trees standing on both sides. I kept driving until the road became too narrow for the car. I parked beside a fallen tree and got out. There were no signs of people. No broken branches from vehicles, no trash, no footprints, nothing. It was exactly the solitude I hoped for. I lifted my backpack onto my shoulders, locked the car, and started walking. The soil was soft, and I could hear the leaves crunch under my boots. For the first hour, I walked calmly, breathing slowly, taking in all the clean air. The deeper I moved into the forest, the quieter everything became. No distant cars, no people, just wind and rustling leaves. I liked how detached I felt. I followed the small path on my map until I reached a clearing around midday. It was flat, dry, and surrounded by tall pines. A small, slow-moving stream ran behind a cluster of bushes, which meant I had a water source nearby. I decided this was the perfect place for my camp. I dropped the bag, stretched my shoulders, and walked the perimeter once to make sure the area was safe. No animal tracks, no signs of predators, no unstable ground. It looked perfect. I set up the tent carefully, making sure the pegs were deep enough to stay firm even in strong wind. After that, I collected dry branches and twigs from the ground, checking each piece to make sure there were no insects inside. I built a small fire pit using flat stones. Everything felt organized. Everything felt normal. When I finished setting up, I sat down, drank filtered stream water, and ate a small meal. The sky was still bright, and there were no strange sounds except birds and insects. I felt comfortable. I felt like I had made a good decision coming here alone. After lunch, I decided to explore around the area before night came. I grabbed a small bag with only essentials and started walking farther into the forest. I wasn't going too far, just far enough to see what was around me. I walked for about 20 minutes and saw nothing unusual. Just thick trees, moss, fallen logs, and a few paw prints from deer or something small. I kept moving, but as I walked I began noticing something strange. There were broken branches. Not small ones, but thick ones snapped cleanly, like something heavy had stepped on them. At first I thought maybe a storm had knocked them down, but the weather had been clear for days, and the marks looked fresh. The deeper I moved, the more of these crushed branches I found. It made me stop and think. Some kind of large animal could be nearby. A black bear maybe, or a moose. I suddenly paid more attention to the ground and surroundings. The forest was quiet now. Too quiet. For a moment, I wondered if I should turn back, but I reminded myself that wild animals live in forests. Seeing signs of them wasn't strange. I kept walking a bit farther but decided to loop back to the campsite. When I reached the camp, the sun was starting to lower. The temperature dropped slightly, and shadows grew longer. I made a fire, cooked a simple meal, and sat beside the tent eating slowly. I listened to insects buzzing and wind brushing through branches. There was nothing else. No footsteps, no rustling, no unnatural sound. I finished eating, cleaned up everything carefully, locking food and trash in hanging bags high above ground so animals wouldn't smell them. I checked the perimeter one more time before crawling into my tent. Inside the tent, I unrolled my sleeping bag, laid down, and listened to the gentle movement of trees. I closed my eyes and let the stillness of the forest carry me towards sleep. But around midnight, something woke me. It was a sound, not loud, but sharp enough to pull me out of deep rest. I opened my eyes in the complete darkness of the tent. I lay still, listening carefully. The sound came again, a soft, dry snapping of leaves or twigs under weight. It wasn't a small animal. The rhythm was too slow and heavy. I felt my heartbeat pushing faster against my chest, but I stayed silent. The sound moved in a slow pattern, like something walking around the camp. I could hear the faint shift of grass and dry sticks. Circled once, then paused. I tried to calm my breathing and think logically. A deer, maybe, or a wild boar, something searching for food. But the steps didn't wander away. They stayed near the tent. I felt a drop of sweat slide down my forehead. Even though the temperature was cool, I kept still, listening. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. The footsteps slowly faded away into the forest. I stayed awake another hour before sleep finally took me again. When I woke in the morning, the sun was already up. I stepped outside immediately and began checking the ground around the camp. There were footprints, not animal footprints. These were human, large, deep, and clear. Someone had been walking around my tent while I slept. My stomach turned. I looked around in every direction, but the forest was silent again. I checked my belongings. Nothing was missing. Nothing was touched. But the tracks didn't feel accidental. Whoever it was had walked around the tent in a slow pattern like they were inspecting every angle. A wave of uneasiness washed over me. Maybe some random hunter. Maybe a hiker passing by. But the prints didn't lead to a trail. They came from deep forest and returned deeper in. Someone had been there deliberately. I ate a small breakfast but couldn't relax. The trees no longer looked beautiful. They looked like tall walls hiding someone just out of sight. I felt exposed in the clearing. I didn't want fear to control my mind, so I tried to behave normally. I filled water bottles, cleaned dishes, and prepared for a hike. I needed to see if there were more signs around. I started walking toward the same area I explored yesterday, following the direction the footprints had gone. The deeper I moved into the forest, the more tracks I noticed. Broken branches, crushed vegetation, boot marks half covered in leaves. They weren't random. They formed a trail. Someone had been walking through the forest without using known paths. I stopped when I reached a point where the woods grew darker and thicker. The air felt heavier. I listened carefully, but I heard nothing. The silence didn't feel like normal quiet. It felt like everything around was watching. I decided not to go further. I turned back toward camp, scanning the ground with every step. When I returned, everything looked the same as before. My gear, my shelter, my bags. But the clearing didn't feel safe anymore. I sat on a log and closed my eyes for a moment. I tried to stay logical. I told myself not to imagine things. Maybe a hunter passed through in the night. Maybe someone was camping far away and checking the area. But if that were true, why didn't they make themselves known? Why approach my tent while I slept? Why walk around it? I wanted to leave right then, but I also felt angry. I had planned this trip for weeks. I didn't want to leave just because of some unknown person. I stayed in camp the rest of the day, sharpening sticks, reorganizing things, making the fire pit stronger. I wanted to stay prepared in case whoever was out there came back. The sun dropped again, and the forest darkened. I tried to stay awake for as long as possible, sitting beside the dying fire, listening to every noise in the woods. Eventually, exhaustion took over and I crawled back into the tent. I zipped the entrance and lay down, clutching the flashlight in one hand. I didn't sleep right away. I listened to the wind pushing branches overhead. Hours passed. Then the footsteps came again, heavier than the night before, slower, deliberate. They approached from the west side of the clearing. The branches and dry leaves snapped with each step. I felt the blood rush into my ears, making it hard to hear anything else. I stayed frozen, barely breathing. The steps reached the edge of my camp and stopped. I imagined a silhouette standing just outside the tent, staring at it quietly. 5 seconds passed. 10, 20. No movement, no retreat, no approach. Then the steps came again, moving around the tent, slow and steady. I gripped the flashlight so hard my hand shook. I wanted to jump out and confront whatever was there, but I didn't know what waited outside. I didn't know if it was armed. I didn't know if it wanted something. I didn't know if it was alone. The footsteps circled half the camp, then stopped again. Then nothing, only silence. I lay awake until sunrise, my muscles tense and stiff, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. When light finally came, I stepped outside cautiously and looked at the ground. More tracks, deeper, fresher. They circled the whole tent, overlapping with yesterday's prints. Someone was watching. Someone was coming closer each night. I decided I needed to leave. But before I packed up, I wanted to check one thing. I followed the fresh footprints into the forest, moving slowly and staying alert. The trail led deeper than I had gone before. The air grew colder and the trees packed closer. After about 15 minutes, I found something that made my skin crawl. A tree with markings on it. Not symbols, not letters, but long vertical cuts. Fresh, deep, carved recently with a knife or something sharp. Next to it was another tree with the same markings. For cuts. Clean and even like someone had been marking territory. My breathing grew shallow. Someone was staying out here. Someone who didn't want to be found. Someone who had been getting closer to my tent every night. I turned around immediately and headed back fast, checking over my shoulder every few seconds. When I reached camp, I packed everything in record time. I threw the tent into the bag without folding it properly. I kicked dirt over the fire and tied everything to the backpack. I didn't care about neatness anymore. I wanted to get out. But as I threw the bag over my shoulders and grabbed my walking stick, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A footprint next to where I had slept. Fresh, so fresh that small pebbles were still settling into the print. It hadn't been there when I left to check the trees. Someone had been here while I was gone. Someone had come to the camp again in daylight. I always liked camping alone. I felt calm when I was far from the noise of people, buildings, cars, and everything that made life feel like it moved too fast. I liked being deep in the woods where everything was still, slow, and quiet. I had done many solo camping trips before, and nothing bad had ever happened to me. I thought I understood the outdoors well enough. I thought I knew what to expect, but this trip showed me how wrong I was. It showed me how quickly a situation can change from peaceful to dangerous, and how nature and other people can become a threat when you least expect it. I decided to go to a large forest area that was not a well-known camping location. It was about 50 kilometers from the nearest small town, surrounded by thick woods and rough terrain. I found it on a satellite map while searching online for quiet places that were far from the usual trails. I did not want to meet hikers, campers, or tourists. I wanted to be alone with the trees, the wind, and the sound of wildlife. This spot looked perfect. There were no marked trails nearby, no official campsites, and no facilities. It was just forest, hills, and empty land. Before leaving, I prepared everything carefully. I packed enough food for 4 days, a lightweight tent, a warm sleeping bag, a water purifier, a camp stove, medical supplies, a knife, 2 flashlights, extra batteries, and spare clothes. I checked the weather forecast, and it showed clear skies for the whole week. No storms, no heavy winds, and no extreme temperatures. The only warning was that the nights would be colder than usual, but I felt prepared for that. I had slept through worse temperatures before. I drove out early in the morning. The roads got worse the closer I got to the forest. The last 10 kilometers were nothing more than a narrow dirt path full of rocks and bumps. Trees leaned over the road, and branches scraped the sides of my vehicle as I passed. I did not see a single person, car, or house in the final half hour of driving. It felt like the world was slowly fading away behind me. When I reached an old clearing that looked large enough to leave the vehicle safely, I stopped and turned off the engine. The silence outside was immediate and thick. There was no humming of traffic, no voices, and no distant sounds of civilization. Just the wind in the trees and the occasional call of a bird. I strapped my backpack on, locked the vehicle, and began walking deeper into the woods. The ground was uneven, and the forest floor was covered with leaves, pine needles, and fallen branches. I walked for about 2 hours before I reached a spot that looked perfect for setting up camp. It was a small flat patch of ground surrounded by tall evergreen trees. There was a gentle stream nearby, which meant fresh water. The area was quiet, peaceful, and completely isolated. I could see no signs of other people being there. No fire rings, no trash, no footprints. It was untouched. I set up my tent slowly and carefully. I liked doing things methodically, making sure everything was correct and stable. I placed the tent in a way that the entrance faced a small open area, giving me visibility in case any animals wandered near. I gathered some dry wood and stacked it beside a large rock where I planned to build a fire later in the evening. After settling in, I sat on a fallen log and took a deep breath. The air smelled clean, rich with pine and earth. I could hear the stream running softly behind the trees. I felt calm and relaxed. This was exactly what I wanted. The first day passed without anything strange happening. I spent the afternoon walking around and exploring the nearby area to get familiar with the surroundings. I followed the stream for a while and noticed that it led downhill into a deeper section of the forest. The trees became thicker the farther I walked, and the light grew dimmer even though it was still early in the day. There were large rocks covered in moss, broken tree trunks, and thick roots sticking up from the ground like veins. It felt untouched and isolated, like I was the only person who had walked there in years. I returned to camp before the sun began to set. I gathered more wood, filtered water from the stream, and prepared a simple meal. As the sky turned dark, I sat by the fire and listened to the natural sounds around me. Owls, insects, the flowing water, and the wind brushing through the forest. I felt comfortable and safe. When the fire burned low, I put it out carefully, checked the area for any animals, then crawled inside my tent. The cold night air pressed against the thin tent walls, but the sleeping bag kept me warm. I eventually fell asleep with the peaceful sensation of being deep in nature. I woke up sometime past midnight, though I did not know why. The forest was silent outside. Too silent. Usually there were small sounds at night, crickets, wind, animals moving in the distance, but now there was nothing. I lay still, trying to listen for something, but the silence was total. I could hear only my own breathing and heartbeat. It felt unnatural. I could not explain it, but something felt off. The air outside felt still, heavy. I looked at the tent walls, watching the faint moonlight cast blurred shadows from the trees. I waited in silence for a long time, but nothing happened. Eventually, I fell back asleep. When I woke again, sunlight was already filtering through the tent. The silence from the night still bothered me, but I tried not to overthink it. The forest was normal again in the morning. Birds were active. The wind moved through the branches, and the stream sounded lively. I ate breakfast, cleaned up, and prepared for a long daytime hike. I wanted to explore farther and go deeper into the forest to see what the area looked like beyond the stream. I packed light and followed the water downhill, moving slowly and observing the landscape. I saw animal tracks, mostly deer, one set of what looked like fox, and something else I could not identify. The ground was soft and muddy near the stream, and the prints were deep. Whatever made them had weight and size. I stopped for a long moment, studying them carefully. They were not bear tracks, and they were not from any forest animal I recognized. The toes were long and thin, almost like fingers, and there were too many of them. But I forced myself not to jump to conclusions. The mud was unstable. Maybe the tracks had overlapped with others, creating a strange shape. I pushed the thought aside and continued walking. As I moved farther, the forest changed slowly. The trees grew taller, and the branches blocked more sunlight. The air became cooler, and the ground stayed damp even where there was no stream. I walked for a couple of hours before I reached a steep ridge. At the top, I could look out across the forest. The view was endless, nothing but trees in all directions. I saw no roads, no cabins, no power lines, no signs of human life. I was completely alone out there, miles from anything. For a moment, I felt a mix of excitement and uneasiness. Being that isolated was both liberating and unsettling. I continued along the ridge for a while, then started my way back down toward camp. I wanted to return before dark. The hike back took longer than I expected because I stopped repeatedly to look at tracks, strange trees, and distant sounds. I heard movement several times, but I never saw anything. Animals moved quickly through the thick brush, and sound traveled strangely in the dense woods. By the time I got back to the tent, the sun was lowering. I made a fire, ate dinner, and took some time to write notes in a small travel journal I sometimes carried. I wrote about the large tracks I had seen and how strange they looked. I also wrote about how silent the night had been before and how uneasy it made me feel. Even though I loved camping alone, I knew that the wilderness was unpredictable. Anything could happen out there. Nature did not care about comfort or safety. As night fell again, the same strange feeling returned. The woods went silent earlier than before. I could not hear crickets, frogs, or birds. The wind stopped moving through the branches. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. I sat by the fire longer than the previous night, listening, waiting, trying to figure out if I could hear anything unusual. I heard occasional movement far beyond the light of the fire, but it was faint and distant. It could have been deer or other animals, but it did not sound like regular wildlife movement. It sounded measured and slow, like something large was moving carefully. The feeling of unease in my stomach grew stronger. The fire was my only comfort. I kept adding wood, keeping the flames high and bright. At some point, I realized I did not want to walk even a few meters away into the trees to relieve myself. Usually I was completely comfortable doing that, but tonight something about the darkness felt different. I stayed near the fire until very late, and when the flames burned low, I reluctantly put them out and crawled into the tent. I again woke up in the middle of the night. This time, something was different. Instead of silence, I heard faint sounds of movement outside. Slow, careful movement, leaves being pressed down softly, branches cracking under weight. Something was out there, close to the tent, moving in the dark. My heart beat hard in my chest. I lay perfectly still, staring upward, trying to control my breathing. I listened. The movement continued. Not fast, not random. It was slow and steady, circling. I could imagine the space outside in the moonlight, the trees, the fire pit, and something moving around the camp, just out of sight. I did not want to unzip the tent. I had no idea what was out there, and it was smarter not to make noise or show myself. I listened for what felt like a long time, maybe an hour, maybe longer. The movement stopped eventually. I stayed awake long after the sounds disappeared, waiting to be sure, before sleep finally took over again.